For nearly 3 years after Prince Philip's death, one envelope remained untouched, locked away behind layers of royal protocol, legal silence, and emotional hesitation. It wasn't sealed with wax or ceremony. It bore no crest. Just 6 handwritten words, to be opened by William alone. But when Prince William finally broke that seal inside Windsor Castle, he didn't just uncover his grandfather's final wishes, he uncovered a decision powerful enough to reshape the monarchy itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For Prince William, grief had never followed a predictable timeline. The world saw composure, saw dignity, saw the careful continuation of duty, but beneath that carefully controlled exterior lived a hesitation he could not explain, a quiet resistance that had kept him from confronting the one thing his grandfather had left behind exclusively for him. The envelope had waited in silence, resting behind secured archive doors within Windsor Castle, preserved not by accident, but by design. Philip himself had specified its isolation. He had ensured it would not be mixed with official wills or processed through legal intermediaries. This was not something meant for committees, nor advisors, nor even kings. This was meant for William, and William alone. Those closest to the inner workings of the palace sensed the unusual nature of Philip's choice. The Duke of Edinburgh had always understood systems. He understood how power moved, how institutions endured, and how fragile even the most ancient structures could become under pressure. For Philip to leave handwritten instructions, bypassing centuries of royal legal tradition, suggested something deeply personal and dangerously important. It meant he had not trusted time, he had not trusted process, he had trusted William. William himself had spent months convincing himself there was no urgency. He told himself the letter would contain reflections, perhaps advice born from decades spent observing the monarchy from its closest vantage point. He expected warmth, he expected memory, he expected closure. What he did not expect was consequence. And yet, even before opening it, something about the envelope unsettled him. The paper had aged slightly, its edges softened not just by time but by handling. Philip had held it, Philip had written it, and judging by the faint tremor in the ink, Philip had written it near the very end, when every word would have required intention, strength, and certainty. The decision to finally open it had not come from curiosity. It came from a quiet internal shift William could no longer ignore. The monarchy itself had begun to feel heavier in recent years, its future more uncertain, its continuity no longer something that could be taken for granted. William had begun to sense the invisible transition happening around him, not publicly declared, but deeply felt. And somewhere inside him, he knew that whatever Philip had left behind was not disconnected from that transition. It was part of it. He chose a room few ever entered, a chamber steeped in generational memory. It was a place where sovereigns had contemplated their burdens, where heirs had confronted their destinies long before the world recognized them as leaders. William stood there alone, holding not just paper, but expectation. His fingers hesitated not from fear of Philip, but from fear of what Philip had seen. Because Philip had always seen further than others. He had always understood the monarchy not as it was, but as it would become. When William finally broke the seal, the sound itself felt louder than it should have, as though it marked more than the opening of an envelope. It marked the beginning of something irreversible. His eyes lowered to the familiar handwriting, each letter deliberate, unmistakably Philip's voice translated into ink. In that moment, William was no longer simply a grandson reading his grandfather's words. He was something else entirely, an heir standing at the threshold of a responsibility he had never anticipated. Because Philip had not written casually, he had written with purpose. Every line carried weight, every word positioned not to comfort, but to prepare. And as William read, the emotional gravity shifted. This was not a farewell. This was instruction. This was foresight. This was Philip, even in death, shaping the monarchy's trajectory with quiet precision. But as William unfolded the fragile paper and read Philip's unmistakable words, his breathing slowed, not from grief, but from the sudden realization that his grandfather had just handed him a burden that could alter the monarchy's future forever. Prince Philip was never a passive observer of royal power, Behind his sharp humor and stoic public image was a man who spent decades quietly studying the monarchy's strengths, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. He watched heirs rise and falter. He watched traditions protect and sometimes suffocate the crown. And in his final years, those closest to him noticed something unsettling. Philip wasn't just reflecting on the monarchy's past. He was preparing to reshape its future. William's hands remained steady, but his thoughts did not. As his eyes followed the next lines of Philip's handwriting, he began to understand something he had never fully grasped while his grandfather was alive, that Philip had never simply existed within the monarchy. He had analyzed it, measured it, tested its limits in silence. For decades, Philip had stood beside the throne, never sitting upon it, never claiming it, yet observing every shift in its strength. He had seen confidence turn into hesitation. He had seen certainty replaced by doubt, and through those years, he had learned something few others truly understood. The monarchy did not fall all at once. It weakened slowly, quietly, through small fractures no one noticed until they became impossible to repair. Philip had witnessed transitions that appeared smooth on the surface, but carried invisible strain beneath. He understood the emotional burden passed from one generation to the next, the silent weight of expectation that could either strengthen an heir or quietly break them. He had watched leaders struggle between personal identity and institutional duty. He had seen how public perception could elevate the crown one moment and threaten it the next. These were not distant observations. They were lessons etched into him over a lifetime of proximity to power, but it was in his final years that Philip's attention had shifted with unusual intensity towards someone no one expected: Prince George. To others, George was simply a child growing into his role, protected by his parents, shielded from pressure. But Philip saw something deeper. He saw clarity. He saw stability untouched by the conflicts that had shaped previous generations. Where others saw innocence, Philip saw potential. Where others saw youth, Philip saw permanence. And it was this realization that began to change the way Philip thought about the crown's future. He had spoken less openly in those years, but privately, his mind had never been more active. Philip understood that the crown estate was not just a symbol of wealth. It was the foundation of royal independence. It ensured that the monarchy did not depend on external forces to survive. It protected sovereign authority from becoming symbolic instead of real. And Philip had grown increasingly concerned about what might happen if that foundation were ever weak. He knew that future pressures would not resemble past ones. They would be more subtle, more relentless, more dangerous, because they would not announce themselves openly. This was why Philip had begun documenting his thoughts, not formally, not publicly, but privately, carefully, constructing a plan that extended beyond his own lifetime. He knew he would not be there to guide George directly. He knew he would not see the challenges George would face. But he also knew that preparation could outlive presence, that foresight could outlast mortality, and most importantly, that William would understand what others might not, because Philip had always trusted William differently. He had seen in him the balance between emotion and restraint, between loyalty and strength. Between loyalty and strength. He knew William would not dismiss his words as sentiment. He would recognize them as instruction, as protection, as responsibility. And as William continued reading Philip's final words, it became painfully clear that this wasn't a sentimental farewell, it was the execution of a strategy Philip had been silently building for years. William's eyes froze on one sentence, one line that immediately shattered every assumption he'd carried into that room. It wasn't vague. It wasn't symbolic. It was absolute. Philip had written, in his own hand, that the crown estate, the financial backbone of royal power, must bypass traditional succession and be secured entirely for Prince George. In that moment, William realized he wasn't just reading a wish. He was witnessing a direct intervention into the monarchy's future. The words did not soften themselves. They did not leave room for interpretation. Philip had not suggested. He had declared. His handwriting, though weakened by age, carried unmistakable authority. It stated with chilling precision that the crown estate must be placed beyond the uncertainties of generation, transition, and anchored directly to George, shielding it from instability before instability ever had the chance to emerge. William's breath caught not from confusion alone, but from the sheer magnitude of what those words demanded. This was not simply a rearrangement of inheritance. This was a disruption of royal gravity itself. For centuries, succession had followed a predictable rhythm, an unbroken chain linking sovereign to heir, heir to successor. It was not just tradition, it was expectation. But Philip had deliberately stepped outside that rhythm. He had reached forward, beyond Charles, beyond William himself, and placed his faith entirely in a boy who had not yet reached the age of understanding the storm waiting ahead of him. William felt the emotional contradiction strike him instantly. Pride, fierce and undeniable, surged at the thought of George being seen as worthy of such trust. But alongside it came something colder, fear, because Philip had not simply elevated George. He had altered the natural order that had defined the monarchy for generations. The crown estate was not symbolic wealth. It was power made tangible. It funded independence. It sustained authority. It ensured the crown remained more than ceremonial. Philip understood this, and now William understood why Philip had written those words by hand instead of entrusting them to formal channels. This was not a decision he wanted diluted by process. He wanted it delivered exactly as he intended, directly into William's hands, unfiltered and undeniable. William's mind raced through the implications. He thought of his father. He thought of himself. He thought of the silent agreements that had shaped their roles since birth. Philip's directive did not erase those roles, but it shifted something fundamental beneath them. It created a new center of gravity, one that pointed not to the present monarch, nor the immediate heir, but to the future beyond them. And Philip had done it intentionally. The emotional weight pressed against William's chest as realization deepened. This was not a rejection of Charles, nor was it a dismissal of William's own place. Philip had framed it differently, carefully, almost urgently. He had described it as protection, as insulation, as preservation. He believed the crown estate must remain untouched by potential turbulence, untouched by pressures that could emerge during transitional reigns. By securing it directly for George, Philip believed he was creating something unbreakable, a foundation immune to disruption. William could feel the quiet brilliance in Philip's thinking, but that brilliance came at a cost, because honoring this instruction would not be simple. It would raise questions. It would create tension. It would force conversations no one had prepared to have, and yet, ignoring it felt impossible. Philip had not written these words as a suggestion to be considered. He had written them as a safeguard to be implemented. In that moment, William was no longer just a reader of Philip's final message. He was its guardian, its executor, its only witness. And that isolation was as heavy as the instruction itself, because the truth now existed entirely within him. A truth that could reshape the monarchy quietly or shatter its equilibrium if mishandled. But the deeper William read into Philip's explanation, the more he realized this decision wasn't about wealth. It was about safeguarding something Philip believed only George could carry forward. Of all the royals Philip could have chosen, he chose George, a child who hadn't even begun to understand the weight of his destiny. But Philip's words revealed something startling. He wasn't choosing George for who he was. He was choosing him for what he represented. To Philip, George wasn't just the future king. He was the monarchy's reset point, untouched by past mistakes, unburdened by public controversies, and capable of carrying the crown forward unchallenged. As William continued reading, he felt the emotional tone of Philip's message shift from urgency to conviction. There was no hesitation in Philip's reasoning, no uncertainty in his belief. He did not speak of George as a distant possibility. He spoke of him as a certainty. Philip had seen something in George that went beyond personality, beyond childhood innocence. He saw freedom from the scars carried by those who had lived through decades of scrutiny, conflict, and compromise. Where older generations had been shaped by the pressures of their time, George remained untouched, standing at the threshold of responsibility, without the weight of inherited controversy pressing against his shoulders. Philip's words revealed a truth few dared to say aloud. The monarchy, for all its strength, carried invisible fractures. It carried memories the public had not forgotten. It carried moments of division that had quietly weakened its foundation. Philip had witnessed those fractures form. He had watched public loyalty shift unpredictably, watched confidence rise and fall with each new era, and in George, he saw something rare, a beginning unmarked by those past burdens. A chance for the crown to exist without the shadow of yesterday's struggles following closely behind. He described George not simply as an heir, but as the crown's clean horizon. It was a phrase that carried both hope and warning. A horizon represented possibility, but it also represented distance. It meant preparation had to begin, long before arrival. Philip believed the monarchy could not afford to wait until George inherited responsibility naturally. By then, forces beyond their control could already be in motion. Legitimacy, once questioned, was far harder to restore than it was to protect. Philip understood this deeply. He knew that power was not secured at the moment. It was claimed it was secured long before, in the silent preparations no one ever saw. What struck William most was Philip's clarity. He did not express doubt in William. He did not express doubt in Charles. But he saw George as something different, not a replacement, but a safeguard. Someone whose future authority could be shielded early, before it was exposed to the unpredictable tides that had shaped previous reigns. Philip believed that empowering George quietly, strategically, would create a stability that could endure beyond the uncertainty of transitional generations. And yet, Philip had not placed this responsibility directly on George. He had placed it on William. That was the unspoken truth beneath every word. Philip trusted William to become more than a father. He trusted him to become a protector of George's unseen inheritance, to prepare him without burdening him, to strengthen him without isolating him, to ensure that when George eventually stepped forward, he would not be vulnerable. He would be ready. William felt the emotional gravity of that trust settle deep within him. This was not simply Philip expressing belief in George. It was Philip expressing belief in William's ability to carry out something no one else could, to act not for himself, but for the future beyond himself, to think beyond his own reign, beyond his own lifetime, and to see the monarchy way Philip had always seen it, not as a possession, but as a responsibility that must be protected long before its survival was ever questioned. But Philip's confidence in George placed William in an impossible position, because honouring Philip's wishes meant confronting forces far more powerful than any private promise. As William lowered the letter, the silence in the room became suffocating. This wasn't just a discovery, it was a test. Philip hadn't left instructions for lawyers, he'd left them for William. And now William faced a decision no heir had ever faced before: obey his grandfather's final wishes and disrupt royal convention, or bury the truth and preserve fragile stability. Either choice carried consequences that would echo across generations. For the first time since opening the envelope, William stopped reading, not because there were no more words, but because he understood what Philip had done. He had not delivered this responsibility to an institution, he had delivered it to a man, a grandson, a future king. Philip had trusted William to decide whether the monarchy would follow its familiar path or quietly step onto an entirely new one, and that realization was heavier than any crown William would one day wear. Because there would be no shared accountability, no formal council to absorb the consequences. The decision, and its aftermath, belonged entirely to him. Loyalty pulled at him first. Loyalty to Philip, not just as his grandfather, but as the man who had stood at the Queen's side for decades, protecting the crown with relentless devotion. Philip had never acted recklessly. He had never allowed emotion to override judgment. If he had written this, it was because he believed it was necessary. That belief carried weight, it demanded respect, and William felt it deeply, not as obligation, but as inheritance. Philip's faith in him was unmistakable, and betraying that faith felt unthinkable. But loyalty was not the only force at work. There was fear, not fear for himself, but fear for the delicate balance that held the monarchy together. His father now stood at the centre of that balance. King Charles had waited his entire life to fulfill his role. His reign represented continuity, stability, reassurance. To introduce Philip's Directive 1 that bypassed both Charles and William, in favor of George could create uncertainty where certainty was desperately needed. It could raise questions no one was prepared to answer, questions about authority, about intention, about the future itself. William understood something else too. Silence was not safety, silence was delay. Burying Philip's wishes might protect the present, but it could endanger the future Philip had worked so carefully to secure. Secrets had a way of surfacing eventually. And when they did, they rarely emerged gently. They erupted, they destabilized, they forced explanations under circumstances far less controlled than the present moment. William knew that postponing this decision would not erase its existence. It would only transfer its burden to a later time, perhaps to George himself. And that thought unsettled him more than anything else. George was still growing, still forming his understanding of the world and his place within it. He deserved protection, not pressure. Yet Philip had believed that protecting George required action now, not later. That protecting him meant ensuring his future strength before vulnerability ever had the chance to take root. William could not ignore that logic. He could not dismiss the foresight behind it, because deep down, he recognized its truth. This was no longer about inheritance. It was about stewardship, about ensuring that when George stepped into his destiny, he would do so standing on ground that could not shift beneath him. Philip had seen that future clearly, and now William saw it too. The emotional weight settled fully upon him. There would be no easy resolution, no choice without consequence. Whatever path he chose would shape not just George's future, but the monarchy's survival in ways no one else yet understood. And in that quiet room, with Philip's final words still resting in his hands, William realized that leadership did not begin with authority. It began with sacrifice. But William wasn't the only one Philip had anticipated, because buried deeper in the letter was a warning that made the stakes even more urgent. Philip's letter didn't just assign power, it warned of danger. He described a future where public trust could fracture, where internal divisions could weaken the crown's authority, and where hesitation could allow the monarchy's foundation to slowly erode. Philip believed the crown estate wasn't just an asset, it was the monarchy's shield. And he believed securing it early would protect George from forces already beginning to move. William felt a shift in the tone of Philip's words, a transition from belief to warning. The calm certainty that had defined the earlier parts of the letter now carried an unmistakable urgency. Philip was no longer explaining his reasoning, he was revealing what he had seen coming. He spoke of instability, not as a distant possibility, but as an inevitability. He had lived long enough to recognize patterns others ignored. He had witnessed how public loyalty could transform into public doubt with alarming speed. He had seen how internal unity, once fractured, could weaken even the most enduring institutions. And he had come to understand a truth few were willing to confront. The monarchy's greatest threats would not always arrive openly. They would emerge slowly, quietly, disguised as change. Philip understood that authority depended on more than titles. Titles could be inherited. Respect could not. The crown estate, in his view, represented something far greater than wealth. It was independence. It ensured the crown answered to no external force, no political pressure, no shifting public sentiment. It allowed the monarchy to exist on its own terms. Without it, sovereign authority risked becoming symbolic, visible, but vulnerable. Philip feared that future generations could face pressures unlike any before. Pressures designed not to destroy the monarchy outright, but to weaken its autonomy piece by piece. What unsettled William most was how clearly Philip had anticipated hesitation. He had written about it directly, as though he knew William would feel the emotional pull of caution. Philip warned that delay could be as dangerous as inaction, that waiting for the right moment often meant waiting until control had already begun to slip away. He believed protection required timing, and timing required courage. The crown, he wrote, could not afford uncertainty. At the very moment it needed strength. Philip framed George's protection not as preference, but as necessity. He believed George represented continuity that could not be compromised. If external pressures ever attempted to influence or destabilize the monarchy, securing the crown estate early would ensure that George's future authority remained untouched. It would create a foundation immune to negotiation, immune to interference. Philip was not preparing George for comfort. He was preparing him for survival. William began to understand something even more profound. Philip had not written this letter for someone who might hesitate forever. He had written it for someone who would recognize when the moment demanded action. He believed William possessed that clarity, that strength, that willingness to carry the burden others could not. Philip trusted that William would see beyond the emotional difficulty of the present and recognize the strategic necessity of the future. The weight of that trust pressed heavily against William's thoughts, because Philip was not offering reassurance. He was offering responsibility. He was not asking William to feel confident. He was asking him to be decisive. Philip had lived long enough to know that comfort was often the enemy of preservation, that survival sometimes required choices that felt impossible in the moment but proved essential in time. William felt the truth of Philip's warning settle into him with quiet force. This was not about acting out of emotion. It was about acting out of foresight. Philip had already seen what hesitation could cost. He had already calculated the consequences of waiting too long. And as William absorbed Philip's final warning, he understood something chilling. His grandfather wasn't asking him to consider this decision. He was asking him to act. For days, William told no one, not Catherine, not his father, not even his closest advisors. Because once spoken aloud, Philip's secret could no longer be contained. William carried it alone, replaying Philip's words over and over, searching for certainty. But the more he thought, the clearer it became Philip hadn't given him a choice. He had given him a responsibility only he could fulfill. The silence around him was no longer peaceful. It was heavy. It followed him into every moment of stillness, pressing against his thoughts with quiet persistence. William had always shared his burdens with Catherine, had always relied on her clarity when decisions became difficult. But this was different. This was not something he could simply explain without altering everything around them. Once spoken, it would stop being contained within his control. It would begin to live in other minds, subject to other fears, her interpretations. And William wasn't ready for that. Not yet. He found himself revisiting Philip's words constantly, not searching for doubt, but searching for permission to wait, to hesitate, to delay. But Philip had left no space for hesitation. Every sentence carried deliberate intent. Every phrase reinforced urgency. William realized his grandfather had anticipated this moment, had anticipated the isolation that would come with understanding the truth before anyone else did. Philip had not only entrusted him with the responsibility, he had entrusted him with the loneliness that came with it. Time itself began to feel different. Every day that passed without action felt heavier than the last. William understood that decisions like this did not exist in isolation. They existed in relation to everything else: the monarchy's stability, his father's reign, George's future. He thought about George often during those days, not as the child he laughed with, not as the son he protected, but as the figure Philip had seen so clearly. He wondered if George would ever understand the burden placed upon him long before he could choose it. He wondered if protecting him now meant exposing him later. These questions had no easy answers, and William carried them all. There was also the quiet awareness of consequence. The monarchy was built not only on authority, but on perception. Every decision carried meaning beyond its immediate effect. If Philip's directive became known, it would not simply be accepted without reaction. It would shift expectations. It would challenge assumptions. It would force the institution to confront a future it had not openly prepared for. William knew this. He felt it with growing certainty. And beneath it all was a deeper sensation, one he could not escape. It was the feeling of being observed by something greater than the present moment. Not by people, but by history itself. By the invisible continuity that connected sovereigns across generations. Philip had understood that continuity. He had acted to protect it, and now William stood within it, aware that whatever he chose would not only define his own legacy, but shape George's. Silence, once a refuge, had become its own form of pressure. It demanded resolution. It demanded clarity. William could not carry this forever without consequence. And yet, acting too quickly could create consequences just as profound. He existed between those two realities, neither fully able to move forward nor fully able to remain still. But even as William struggled to reconcile the weight of Philip's words with the fragile balance of the present, something else began to emerge, a quiet, undeniable realization that Philip's vision was not distant or theoretical. It was already unfolding, already influencing decisions, already shaping the future in ways few could yet see. But while William struggled privately, one truth became unavoidable. The future Philip envisioned was already beginning to take shape. Philip's letter didn't just change William, it changed how he saw everything. Every decision, every preparation, every moment with George now carried new meaning. This wasn't about inheritance, it was about protection. Philip had trusted William to become the bridge between past and future, between tradition and transformation. And whether the world knew it or not, the crown's destiny had already shifted the moment William opened that envelope. At first, nothing outwardly appeared different. William continued fulfilling his duties, continued honoring expectations, continued maintaining the calm composure the world had come to associate with him. But internally, something irreversible had taken hold. The way he viewed time itself had changed. He was no longer thinking in terms of years or then decades. He was thinking in terms of generations. Every decision he made now carried an invisible thread, connecting it to George's future. Every conversation, every moment of guidance, every quiet lesson became part of a preparation that had begun long before George could ever recognize it. William did not burden George with the knowledge of Philip's directive. He did not change his role as a father. He remained steady, present, protective, but beneath that presence lived a new awareness. He began to observe George differently, not critically, but attentively. He noticed his instincts, his confidence, his ability to carry himself with quiet certainty even in moments of uncertainty. These were small things, subtle things, but to William, they carried profound meaning, because he now understood that George's future would not simply unfold naturally. It would need to be protected, shaped carefully by the decisions William made long before George ever stepped fully into his destiny. This realization reshaped William's own approach to leadership. He became more deliberate, more patient, less focused on immediate outcomes, and more focused on long-term stability. Philip's words had shown him that the monarchy's survival did not depend on reacting to the present. It depended on preparing for the future before it arrived. William embraced that perspective fully. He no longer saw his role as simply maintaining continuity. He saw it as strengthening continuity in ways no one else yet understood. Philip's influence did not end with his death. It expanded. It lived within William's choices, within his silence, within his evolving understanding of what it truly meant to safeguard the crown. Philip had trusted him not only to carry out instructions, but to carry forward vision, and William accepted that responsibility with quiet resolve. He did not seek recognition. He did not seek validation. He understood that some of the most important decisions in royal history would never be publicly acknowledged. They would exist beneath the surface, shaping outcomes without ever revealing their origins. Slowly, the monarchy itself began to realign, not through visible declarations, but through subtle shifts in preparation and perspective. William's focus extended further into the future than ever before. His decisions reflected patience, foresight, and restraint. He understood now that protecting George did not require dramatic action. It required consistency, it required clarity, it required the willingness to think beyond his own reign, beyond his own lifetime, in the same way Philip had. And in accepting that responsibility, William became something more than an heir. He became a guardian, not just of George, but of the continuity Philip had fought to preserve. He became the living connection between what the monarchy had been and what it would become. Philip had not simply entrusted him with instructions. He had entrusted him with survival, because in the end, Philip's final written wishes weren't just about George inheriting power, they were about ensuring the crown itself would survive whatever came next. Prince Philip spent his life standing beside the crown, but in death, he may have shaped it more profoundly than ever before. His final written wishes, didn't just assign responsibility, they created certainty. He ensured that long after he was gone, his influence would endure not in memory, but in action, and as William folded the letter and sealed it once more, one truth became undeniable. Philip's final move had already changed everything. In that quiet moment of finality, William understood that Philip had accomplished something few ever could. He had reached beyond his own lifetime and placed his hand firmly upon the monarchy's future. He had waited for circumstances to dictate the crown's fate. He had shaped those circumstances himself, not through proclamation, not through public decree, but through foresight, through trust, through a single act of preparation that would echo long after his voice had fallen silent. Philip had always understood that survival did not belong to the strongest institution. It belonged to the best prepared one. William felt the permanence of that realization settle into him. This was no longer about uncertainty. Philip had removed uncertainty. He had secured continuity in its purest form, not by controlling the present, but by protecting the future. George, still untouched by the weight of his destiny, had already been positioned as the crown's protected horizon, not burdened, but shielded, not exposed, but fortified. Philip had ensured that when George eventually stepped forward, he would do so standing on a foundation no external force could weaken, and William now understood that he was the one entrusted to guard that foundation until the moment George was ready to claim it. This responsibility transformed William in ways no one else could see. He was no longer simply preparing himself to become king. He was preparing George to inherit something stronger than he himself had inherited. That was Philip's true legacy, not authority, not wealth, but stability. Stability that could endure pressure, stability that could outlast doubt, stability that could protect the crown even in moments of uncertainty. Philip had understood that the crown estate was not merely an asset to be passed down, it was a shield to be preserved. And through his final written wishes, he had ensured that shield would remain exactly where it needed to be. The quiet brilliance of Philip's intervention lay in its invisibility. The world would never fully see it. The public would never hear the private words that had shaped this outcome. But its impact would exist nonetheless in every decision William made, in every preparation quietly set in motion, in every step George would one day take toward his destiny. Philip's presence had not ended. It had evolved. It lived within the structure he had protected, within the continuity he had secured, within the future he had quietly safeguarded. And William, standing at the center of that responsibility, no longer questioned his role. He accepted it fully. Not because it was easy, not because it was expected, but because it was necessary. Philip had trusted him, and William would not allow that trust to be misplaced. He would carry it forward. He would protect it. He would ensure that when George's time came, he would inherit not uncertainty, but strength, not fragility, but permanence. Because Philip had understood something others often overlooked. The crown did not survive by chance. It survived because someone, somewhere, made the decision to protect it before protection was needed. And now that decision belonged to William, because sometimes the most powerful royal decisions are not made in public ceremonies, but in private moments, written in fading ink, waiting for the right heir to discover them, and the courage to carry them forward. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.